Hi, everyone, and welcome to the lineup. Today is July the 25th, 2024. I'm Barry Stagner. Very glad to have you joining with us this week. And as most of you have probably heard, and Amir has, I think, posted something out on social media. First of all, Amir is back home and had a great trip heading home. He got some good sleep. So please keep praying for him as he goes back into the midst of all that's happening there in his home country. And he had mentioned that Pastor Mike Golay, who was supposed to be hosting or running the moderator position in the Q&A, had a motorcycle accident. And so please keep Mike in prayer. He got pretty banged up. Thankfully, he had on a good helmet and didn't hit his head, sustained a head injury, but he broke his collarbone, 6 ribs, broke a thumb. It was also his pelvis. So he's moving into a rehab facility. May have already done that. I haven't heard anything yet today. But please keep Mike in prayer. Looking forward to him getting back in the game, so to speak. And but just one of those things. He hit a deer on a motorcycle. Mike lives in Minnesota, and obviously that sort of thing is going to happen back there. And so please keep Mike lifted up in prayer. And, we've got an interesting week. And, it seems like there's some things that kind of surface to the top, so to speak, regarding the prophetic situation that our world is in and watching things unfold. We've got kind of a theme running through this week's stories that we'll talk about here in a moment when we arrive at the midsection. But I think we've all heard stories of the speech that Netanyahu gave addressing the Congress and some of the aftermath of that. And the Associated Press called it a fiery speech where Netanyahu vowed total victory in Gaza and denounced U.S. protesters. The article says Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu pledged in a scathing speech to Congress on Wednesday to achieve total victory against Hamas and denounced American opponents of the war in Gaza as idiots, taking a combative stance in a visit the Biden administration has hope will yield progress in negotiations to end the fighting. Netanyahu used a high-profile address to a joint meeting of Congress to emphasize long-standing and close ties between the U.S. and Israel, but the speech put in sharp relief the divisions in American society stirred by the war, with dozens of Democratic lawmakers boycotting the address and thousands of protesters outside the Capitol condemning the war and the humanitarian crisis created by it. And, as Mir and I were chatting during his visit, he had shared with us, my wife and I, and son and his wife at a dinner we were having together, that the average Palestinian eats more calories per day right now than every third world country on the planet. So, this whole span of the narrative and all that, creating these things that they know would stir up the feelings of this egalitarian society that we live in, that it's not fair that anybody has more than anybody else, and the other things we've talked about over the last months and years. The protests, some of them at least, near the Capitol turned chaotic, including one a few hundred yards of the tightly guarded Capitol grounds at Union Station, where protesters spray painted marble statuary and replaced American flags with Palestinian ones. Officers on the streets surrounding the Capitol brawled with demonstrators, swinging batons and spraying tear gas. Well, the officers were actually attacked by the demonstrators. And speaking for nearly an hour to frequent applause from U.S. lawmakers, as well as stony silence from many leading Democrats, Netanyahu said the U.S. has a shared interest in his country's fight against Hamas and other Iran-backed armed groups. Now, it's also worthy of mention that the supposed or proposed nominee for the Democratic presidential seat did not show up for his speech in protest. Kamala Harris was a no-show, and that says a lot about her intentions for the future and the relationship that America has with Israel. America and Israel must stand together. When we stand together, something really simple happens, Netanyahu said. We win, they lose. He was wearing a yellow pin expressing solidarity with the Israeli hostages held by Hamas. And let me just pause here for a moment. How often do you hear leaders today of this administration talking about the 8 Americans that are hostages? We don't hear anything about it. All we hear about is the disproportionate response of Israel to the slaughter and massacre and the heinous crimes, war crimes committed against the Israeli people on October 7th. But the Israeli leader soon pivoted to a darker tone as he derided those protesting the war on college campuses and elsewhere in the U.S., gesturing to demonstrators happening on the streets outside the Capitol. He called the protesters useful idiots for Israel's adversaries. Making his first trip abroad since the war started, he made no mention of the months of U.S.-led mediation for a ceasefire and hostage release. His remarks did not appear to close the door on a deal, but showed no sign he was eager for one. And Israel will fight until we destroy Hamas' military capabilities and its rule in Gaza and bring all our hostages home. That's what total victory means, and we will settle for nothing less. Representative Rashida Tlaib, the only Palestinian American serving Congress, was holding up a sign that said war criminal on one side and guilty of genocide on the other. And Tlaib is one of Netanyahu's most strident critics in Congress and was censured for her comments last year against the Israel-Hamas war, which has killed more than 39,000 in Gaza. And again, those are the Hamas Health Ministry statistics, and it's been proven time and time again that those stats are grossly inflated. Now, of course, listen, all casualties of war are catastrophic. And, of course, we're looking forward to a time where there is no war. And even during the millennial reign of Christ, they'll beat their swords into plowshares and we'll become a peaceful world. And, just some of these things that are going on out there in hopes of that will never, ever bring it about. The only one that's going to bring peace on earth and goodwill toward men is the Prince of Peace when he rules and reigns in righteousness from the throne of David in Jerusalem, seated in the fourth temple that is the temple of the Messiah, the Holy One of Israel, the King of the Jews, the head of the church. And isn't that exciting to think about the fact that someday everything is going to be put in order? And, it's very bizarre, I think, those of us who teach Bible prophecy, to run across the latter chapters of the book of Revelation and see that after everything that the Lord has done, all that was experienced, justice and truth and goodness and kindness and all these things that are dominant during the millennial reign, Satan is released for just a brief time, and he deceives millions and possibly billions into fighting against the Lord, whom he will destroy finally, and the great white throne judgment will follow that. It just doesn't matter to some people what God does or what is the right thing to do in response to being attacked, and they're just not happy with anything that's of the Lord. Now, this is important because the reality is there's coming a time where the whole world is going to be deceived and listen to the voice of a false prophet who is empowered by, or I should say, the Antichrist and the false prophet, both of whom are empowered by the dragon, which is the devil. And Revelation 13 says people will worship the dragon. That's Satan. So we will have rampant Satan worship during the tribulation period. I shouldn't say we're not going to be here, but the world is going to experience that during the tribulation, and we are seeing the precursors to that now. It just doesn't, some of the responses to logical reactions and things that are clearly the right thing and science-based and all that are just looked at as though it's the view of a nutcase. And this is demonic. Listen, inside of a mother's womb is a human baby. It's not a clump of cells or any of these other things and all the things we've talked about over the months and years, and especially since the overturning of Roe v. Wade. There's just no other explanation for it other than the fact the world is already prostrating and submitting. That's the actual meaning of the word worship, to the devil himself and all of his plans. And therefore, watching things progress in the way that they are so rapidly and so amazingly, and watching one moment in time flip the whole world and advance it in the prophetic narrative is just stunning, and should remind us that the Lord is coming for us soon, maybe even today. Well, the Gateway Pundit says Kamala Harris, or Kamala, I'm not sure how I hear it both ways, but anyway, you know who she is. She's the one with that great insight that yesterday was today yesterday, and today is today today, and tomorrow will be today tomorrow, and whatever all that was supposed to mean. I'm sure you've heard that, and I I think that ought to be your campaign slogan. Maybe people can see exactly what she's all about. And Kamala Harris and Democrats stand with Hamas. Top Democrats boycott the Israeli leader's speech to Congress. Israeli leader Benjamin Netanyahu arrived in Washington, D.C. on Tuesday, and the Biden regime refused to send out Biden administration officials to greet him on the tarmac. On Monday, the Biden regime canceled Biden's meeting with Netanyahu that was planned for Tuesday. Then on Wednesday, top Democrats, including Kamala Harris, boycotted the Jewish leader's speech to Congress. Instead, they stood with the protesters supporting Hamas, who despise Israel and its leader. Several lawmakers responded to the shameful move by Kamala Harris and Democrats. And Hamas is currently holding American citizens hostage, the article says. Sorry, I wound up with an article or an advertisement right in the middle of the news story. Holding American hostages from their invasion and slaughter of Jews on October 7th. And the Democrats couldn't put their hatred of the Jewish state behind them for one day. You know, one of the interesting things that was said during the speech by Bibi Netanyahu was that, you know, to hold up signs saying gays for Gaza is like saying chickens for KFC. You know, these people are so ignorant, they're so blinded by their hatred, they don't understand that there are no open gays in Gaza, because you will be beaten or imprisoned or killed, because obviously homosexuality goes against the Quran. So, you know, just the lunacy that we're experiencing today is all in preparation for what's going to happen, and the delusion, the strong delusion that will take place, that people will believe the lie, the claims of the Antichrist of his deity during the tribulation period. Stage is being set, the mindset is already present. So again, keep your eyes lifted up off the circumstances and on our eternal destination, and we'll do a lot better making our way through these perilous times. Now, the Jewish News Syndicate says the Netanyahu-Biden meeting is going to focus on the Gaza ceasefire deal, and this has been back and forth in every which way since this was announced. He's not going to meet with them. Now he's going to meet with them. Kamala Harris was going to meet with them and then not meet with them. Now she's going to be present at the Biden-Netanyahu meeting, and who knows what's actually going to happen. But ongoing efforts to secure a ceasefire in Gaza will take center stage during Israeli Prime Minister's scheduled meeting with Joe Biden at the White House on Thursday, according to administration officials. A senior administration official speaking on condition of anonymity said on Wednesday that ceasefire talks were the final stretch. The president and prime minister will try to close some final gaps, he said. We believe it's in the closing stages and a deal is closable. He reiterated comments by U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, who said on July 19th that a hostage for ceasefire deal would be the overriding focus of the meeting. And Biden himself, in his Wednesday speech announcing his withdrawal from the presidential race, signaled that bringing a halt to fighting in Gaza would remain a top priority for his remaining tenure. I'm going to keep working to end the war on Gaza, bring all the hostages. I have to pause there. It's not a war on Gaza, it's a war on Hamas. And bring home all the hostages to bring peace and security to the Middle East. And you know, that's an interesting phrase, because when Paul talked about when they say peace and safety, the Greek word translated safety can also be translated as security. So this is a direct biblical concept, and not in the way that Biden said it, by the way, to the Middle East. And in this war, he said, Netanyahu will ask that any ceasefire deal include written assurance that Israel can resume fighting until it meets its war objectives, according to Israel's Channel 12. Earlier this month, Netanyahu said that the ceasefire plan they had agreed to with the United States would allow Israel to retrieve the hostages without infringing on the other objectives of the war. And the prime minister has stated those objectives as victory over Hamas, such as victory over Hamas, ensuring that Gaza will never again pose a threat to Israel, returning the hostages and returning northern residents safely to their homes. Netanyahu is also expected to discuss Iran's role in backing Hamas, Hezbollah, and other terror groups. And during his address to Congress on Wednesday, the Israeli premier said, in the Middle East, Iran is virtually behind all the terrorism, all the turmoil, all the chaos, all the killing. And citing U.S. intelligence, he said Iran was also funding the anti-Semitic and anti-Israel protests in the United States. And that's not the first time we've heard that. And that has been verified without question. So again, I want to pause for a moment, and I think we all recognize, many people have, sought to do some interpretive gymnastics and try and find the United States in the last days scenario, but we're not there. There's no reference to us whatsoever. And you have to wonder, what is going to be the catalyst for the removal of the United States from the world stage. I think most of us hope that it's to rapture the church, just basically debilitates this country to a degree where it's non-functional, and other countries would come in and basically just take it over. We do know there's going to be a complete shift in the geopolitical platform throughout the whole world after the rapture of the church. And the Antichrist is going to divide the world up into 10 sections under 10 of his cronies. Leadership, you're going to disagree with 3 of them, and that number will whittle down to 7. But I just think that we are at a place where, and this is kind of where we're going to talk about here, where things are going here in a couple of minutes. But our country is a mess. The United States is an absolute mess. And, it's not that we need to just blindly support Israel. And I had somebody comment on, I think it was a Q&A or something anyway, that said they wish they knew that Amir and I understood the definition of a Zionist. And then they talked about, the fact that this is a Israeli faction, and, that's not what a Zionist is. A Zionist is not limited to the Jews. A Zionist is somebody that believes in Israel's right to exist and live in the land that God gave them. That's a Zionist. And if you want to use that title on me, I'm fine with that. I do believe that the King of Kings and Lord of Lords is coming back to Jerusalem. I believe he's going to rule and reign in righteousness from Jerusalem. And I believe that our eternal habitation, I should say, is going to be in the New Jerusalem. And so, I'm all for the Jews returning to their national homeland. And I do believe God is going to continue to supernaturally protect them. And at the end of the tribulation, 1/3 of the Jews are going to look upon the one whom they pierced. The others sadly will die during the tribulation in unbelief. But God is going to supernaturally protect those who will look upon the one whom their ancestors pierced and mourn for him to a level that one would mourn over the loss of their only son. So this is what Paul talked about in Romans 11, that all Israel will be saved. Now, our next story is interesting because I posed a question, I think it was a week or so ago, and I've talked about it, privately with some other prophecy teachers. I wonder if this effort to assassinate former President Donald Trump is going to open the proverbial Pandora's box, and that others aren't going to take this idea and run with it. Well, Israel Hayom says former Iranian president survives an assassination attempt. And the Iranian International News, affiliated with the Iranian exiles, claims that Mahmoud Ahmadinejad's vehicle was sabotaged, causing it to go out of control and crash into guardrails on the road. Former Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad survived an assassination attempt after regime insiders were involved in sabotaging his vehicle, according to the report. And according to the report, sourced from within the regime, the former president's vehicle lost control after sabotage that likely included remote control of the vehicle. The vehicle crashed into several guardrails, overturned, and all of its passengers were injured. However, the president was removed from the vehicle a few hours before the incident and transferred to a security force vehicle accompanying him after the vehicle's air conditioner broke down. The news site claimed that the vehicle was handed over to a presidential security unit for repairs, but was, instead of being taken to the unit's usual garage, it was taken to an unknown location. And the news site blames the Iranian regime and the Revolutionary Guard for the alleged assassination attempt, noting that Ahmadinejad was disqualified from running in the last presidential elections in the country, and the former president has expressed criticism of the regime in recent years and clashed with several senior officials in the government. So, former president being an attempted assassination on him because of his disagreement with the current administration sounds like a pretty familiar story. So, and despite his extreme positions against Israel and the U.S. and his combative stance against the West, Ahmadinejad has always been considered an outsider to the regime's inner circle and not a true insider of the Islamic Revolution. And boy, does that smack of a recent story that happened in our own country. And our next story, I think, falls under the banner of the wars and rumors of wars. And, we talk about this, that, things can just change in a moment, and we could all of a sudden be in the midst of a global exchange of a nuclear level. Just wake up one day and it's already happening. And Newsweek reports, multiple news outlets actually, that NATO allies F-16 jets scrambled after a Russian drone crossed the border. Romania sent F-16 fighters to the border with Ukraine early on Wednesday after Russia launched drone attacks close to the NATO country's territory. Between Tuesday and Wednesday this week, Russia's military carried out a new series of drone attacks in Ukraine near the border with Romania. Bucharest Ministry of National Defense gave this in a statement. 2 Romanian Air Force F-16 fighter jets took off from a military base in southeastern Romania at 2:19 a.m. local time on Wednesday to monitor the aerial situation, returning to their base about 2 hours later, the ministry said. And Romanian teams are searching for possible objects on Romania's side of the border around the village of Plaru, Bucharest said, and Plaru is across the border from the Ukrainian port town of Izmail, separated by the Danube River. And local authorities in Izmail said early on Wednesday that Russia had carried out a massive attack using Iranian-designed Shahed kamikaze drones on Izmail, damaging port infrastructure and a residential building. And 3 people were hospitalized, the local administration said in a post on social media. Ukraine's Air Force said on Wednesday that Russia had launched 23 attack drones at Ukraine overnight, and the air defenses had intercepted 17 of the uncrewed aerial vehicles. And most of the drones were detected across the southern Ukrainian city of Odessa, northeast of Izmail. Ukraine's Air Force added in a social media statement. Now, the interesting thing about this is the targeting of the ports at Izmail. This is the primary port through which grain is exported. We've talked about this since the beginning of the Russia invasion of Ukraine, that you've got 2 countries who are embattled, who are a main source of grain and other food staple products, as well as other industrial products to much of Europe. And, Ukraine is often referred to as the breadbasket of Europe, and supplying, much of the grain needs of the European or the EU, the nations involved in the European Union. And, again, when we've got these food shortages, and now we've got all these reports coming in about reduced crop yields because of inclement weather. And of course, man-made climate change is always the culprit in the minds of many today. And, we've got a lot of things happening that are reducing food supplies around the world. And remember what's going to happen under the rider on the black horse during the tribulation period, which we will not be here for, by the way, where we have, the food supply is in such shortage that a day's pay will be the cost of simply a quart of wheat or 3 quarts of barley. Barley is a cheaper grain. It's long known in biblical times as the grain of the poor. So this is just one meal for one person for one day will cost a whole day's labor during the tribulation period. We're watching all kinds of things happen that could certainly feed into this. And then finally, and the rider of the Chloros horse, the pale horse of Revelation chapter 6, we're told that the food supply is so short and meager throughout the world that the beasts of the earth and humans are competing for the remaining food supply, and humans are even becoming targets of the beasts of the earth and seeking to use them as a food source. So again, just potential things that could be feeding into what's ultimately going to happen during the tribulation period. And I believe, and I make no apology for saying it, I believe we are so very, very close. And we have to be looking up at our redemption, knowing our redemption is nigh. Wars of rumors of wars, food shortages. There's an article, I didn't include it today because we mentioned it in China, because of their one child per family rule, and because so many females were aborted during the time of the one child per family rule, because it's the man who carries on the family name, an issue very, very important in Asian culture and, well, any culture, but particularly in countries like China, that now they've got an imbalance in what the natural order has ordained. It's like the ratio has always run some 49 and between 49% and 51% of male versus female in the birth rate. And now you've got females being aborted as soon as the gender is revealed in order to carry on the family name. And now there aren't enough women in China to marry the overabundance of men in China. And again, the reports that have come out are a massive reduction in population by 2050, which again, things are going to, I believe, will be all done by then as far as, the Lord coming back and ruling and reigning from Jerusalem at that point in time. But there was another story just today that for the 15th year in a row, the population growth in Japan has been in the negative. In other words, there's been more deaths than there have been births in Japan. So we're seeing so many things changing that tell us, again, the whole political landscape is going to change when the church is removed and people disappear. And I don't know if there's going to be, puddles of clothes, so to speak, all over the world. I don't know how this whole transformation is going to take place. I just know that it is going to take place. And in a moment and twinkling of an eye, we're going to put on immortal incorruptibility. We're going to be morally pure, and we're going to be immortal in our physicality, and we will forever be with the Lord. Perfect, glorified bodies that are described as that which has been predestined for us, that we will be conformed into the image of Christ, is what Philippians tells us. 1 John 3:2 says, when we see him, we will be like him. We'll see him as he is. And to that I must say, come quickly, Lord Jesus. Come get us and help us to be busy about the primary business of every Christian, which is leading other people to you. Reuters says, and here's where I think, we need to pause for a moment and take note of what's happening in our world. I don't think anybody needs to be told that our country here in the United States is polarized and that our world is polarized. And Reuters says the upheaval shows schism in society. Russia said on Wednesday that the upheaval surrounding the U.S. election, including an assassination attempt against Donald Trump and the exit of President Joe Biden from the race, showed that divisions in an American society are in danger of falling into a nosedive. Former President Trump, the Republican candidate, was shot in the ear at a campaign rally on July 13th, while Biden abandoned his reelection bid on Sunday and endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris as the Democratic Party's candidate. And asked directly by Reuters who would she prefer as U.S. president, Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova did not express a clear preference. The United States is now in a situation where they wish to get through the current year without falling into a nosedive, Zakharova said. She also said that there was evidence of deep divisions in American society and civil conflict, but that the United States still viewed Russia as an existential enemy. The protagonist of American electoral theater should therefore be viewed without illusion, she added. And by Wednesday morning, President Vladimir Putin had yet to comment in public on Biden's exit from the race. And Putin has suggested several times in the past that for Russia, Biden is preferable to Trump. U.S. intelligence has indicated, however, that Russia would prefer a Trump victory, and previous U.S. intelligence assessments have found that Moscow tried through influence campaigns to help Trump win in 2016 against Hillary Clinton and 2020 against Biden. And, of course, we know the story of the fake dossier that was financed by the Democratic Party and authorized by Hillary Clinton back at that time. And Zakharova said, blaming Russia for its own troubles, miscalculations, problems, mistakes, and shortcomings, it seems to me, is a manifestation of the disease of American democracy. We do not interfere in the internal affairs of sovereign states, much less exert influence, and do not model or exert pressure on electoral processes. The upcoming elections in the United States are no exception. We have never interfered in them previously, she concluded. And, I think one thing that comes to mind with this mention of American democracy, I mentioned this before, but it bears repeating. We are not a democracy. Democracy, by definition, is the majority rules. And any historian will tell you democracy will always devolve into tyranny. Because when one group is in complete control, the other group is overlooked and mistreated. And, it creates that two-class society, if you will. We are a constitutional republic to where every state, however many votes they may have in the Electoral College, counts. It's not just a simple majority. And that's why you can have a president who wins the popular vote, but does not win the Electoral College. And there's a huge difference in this system that our founding fathers, I should say, saw the wisdom in to not allow this to become a democracy, to where just there's one group that takes over and they're in charge, and they'll be in charge until the country folds. And that's part of why we keep hearing this from those in this current administration and others like them, that, our democracy is in danger. Our democracy is in danger because this is a term that is revered, to where a total misunderstanding of the definition of the word has been presented to people, and that Donald Trump is a danger to our democracy. Well, we are a constitutional republic, and with that constitutional republic, we do have the system of voting into office through the Electoral College, which means that, I want you to think about this. If there was no Electoral College, Texas, Florida, New York, and California would by themselves elect every single president. And there would be no need for any of the other states to even vote. So don't ever listen to anybody that says we need to do away with the Electoral College, because that's the real threat to our country. Doing away with the system that protects us and makes every American's vote count. Now, Politico says that Poland warns Europe to prepare for change in U.S. ties, regardless of the next president. And this is where I think our last article ties into this one, where the Russians are saying, America is divided. There's deep divisions in the country. And Poland's foreign minister has warned European allies they need to prepare for a change in the transatlantic relationship and start spending more on defense, no matter who is elected U.S. president in November. In comments shared exclusively with Politico, Radek Sikorsky said he believes that the U.S. would remain a strategic partner for the European Union, regardless of who wins the U.S. Presidential race. But European countries have no other choice than to take on more responsibility for their collective defense, given that Washington will continue to keep a close eye on Asia. It's our job to explain to our U.S. partners that as long as we are feeding Russia's threat, we won't be able to engage fully there, he said, referring to Asia, where European countries have far fewer forces deployed than the United States. And the comments from Sikorsky, which were made after U.S. President Biden announced he's withdrawing from the presidential race, underscores growing concern among Washington's European allies that the U.S. may significantly downgrade its investment into NATO, especially if former President Donald Trump and his isolationist running mate, J.D. Vance, are elected to the White House in November. Now, that's pretty specific language there to associate with J.D. Vance. And, all of a sudden, patriotism has become isolationism. And, this whole we are the world, we are the children, and all this other stuff that we've been experiencing lately has cast a long shadow on loving your country and, saying just terrible things like make America great again, taking care of our veterans, the thousands and thousands of them that are living on the street and don't have just the basic necessities for daily life and survival after they risked their life to protect our country and other countries as well. And all of a sudden, this is negative. And this is what I think we need to draw our attention to, is this story, the last story, all the other things we see happening in our world today, this chaos that is now becoming dominant all over the world is all in preparation for somebody to come together, stand up and say, you know what, I got a plan. And this is how we're going to get through this. And the whole world is going to go after him again, according to Revelation chapter 13. And all of this upheaval and all of this infighting and all of this division and all of this politicking that's going on that reveals the dark divide, deep divide, I should say, in the United States and other countries as well, is all in preparation for the man of sin, the son of perdition, the lawless one who rises into power and takes over the world after the rapture of the church. And it's interesting that we're told in Daniel 11, he deceives the world by intrigue. And now intrigue is can also be translated as slippery speech, or in other words, he's been described as a smooth-talking flatterer. And this is how that whole covenant with Israel is going to be, and many other nations is going to be established during the tribulation. There's going to be a smooth-talking flatterer who comes along and rises up and falls in line, at least in what he is communicating, with the vision of a global order, unity, as it used to say, I think it was during the Depression era, a chicken in every pot was a campaign promise. Everybody is going to have the same thing. We hear this kind of talk coming already from the World Economic Forum, that you'll own nothing and be happy. All of your needs will be met and blah, 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 and all this stuff. All of this is feeding into that. And this chaos is a necessary component for these groups to come in and to basically take over and win the war without a shot fired, so to speak, at least in the literal sense. It's going to be a deception through words that leads the world to follow after this man. And looking at what's happening in the attitude of the world, it's just simply a point of recognition. In this article about the EU, things are going to change. Things are going to be different. And, again, I think we need to recognize, especially those of you as Americans, that it wouldn't matter so much if we weren't handing out money like it grows on trees. And apparently this administration has felt like it does. And the billions and billions of dollars that have been passed out by our country that, to be quite honest, we just don't have. And the debt, the trillions and trillions of dollars of debt that we now have will never be paid back. And there's no way to pay it back. It's just paper. It's just printing paper and shipping it over to other countries. There's nothing behind it. There's no gold standard by which the value is established. Now, these this isolationist label that's been thrown at J.D. Vance, and same thing has been said, about Donald Trump, even Angela Merkel, when she was chancellor in Germany, said that Trump has done more damage to the advance of globalism than any one man in history. And, all of that is because he loves America and thinks that America ought to take care of Americans. And if you think that America ought to take care of Americans, you are against this globalism that is becoming dominant, that the Antichrist will actually bring about. And here's something else I think that's key to remember. There have been world dominating empires of the past. Revelation even talks about 5 kings that were, and one now is. Speaking of the Roman Empire at the time of John's writing, but we had the Egyptian domination, the Assyrian domination, the Babylonians, the Medo-Persians, the Greeks. These were world dominating empires, but none of them ruled the whole world geographically. During the tribulation, the Antichrist is going to rule over the whole world for the first time in world history. But his plan's not going to work because there is coming one after him who's going to come back and destroy all this with the brightness of his coming, and he will reign forever and ever. And if I were watching, I would say amen right there. Now, The Hill says Biden's decision to drop out has nothing to do with his health, according to the White House. President Biden's decision to step aside as the expected Democratic nominee in November has nothing to do with his health, his top spokesperson said Wednesday ahead of his primetime address to the nation. It has nothing to do with his health. The president is going to speak directly to the American people in prime time, according to Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre, telling reporters at a briefing. And in his letter, he talked about the country, he talked about the party, he talked about the moment we're in right now. She continued, it's not about his health. I could say, no, that's not the reason. So just hear him out. Jean-Pierre also rejected the idea that she and White House aides were engaged in a cover-up to mask Biden's decline from the public. There's been no cover-up. We want to be very clear about that, Jean-Pierre said. And the president's health became a major point of speculation following a disastrous debate performance on June 27th, where Biden struggled to complete his thoughts. The White House said after the debate that had started that the president was dealing with a cold. Well, I don't feel real good when I have a cold. I'm sure you don't either, but I can still think, can still answer questions. Biden is 81 and he would have been 86 at the end of his potential second term. He's been isolating with COVID for 5 days until testing negative on Tuesday, and now he's made multiple public appearances, pretty much dispelling that he was in hospice or only moments away from death and all the other things that were floating around. And by the way, that makes another point. We need to be careful about some of the sensationalism that floats around. And, it's easy when, things are headed in a direction. It seems like the number of people who are proposing it is just growing greater and greater and greater. But, I think there's 2 things to take from this story. One, be careful about what you listen to. And secondly, everybody knows that he's not with it. I mean, if there was anything the debate proved, it isn't how you can be stifled in your thinking when you have a cold. The takeaway is this guy's got no business ruling the free world and sitting in the desk or seat of the most powerful position on the whole planet as head of the world's only superpower. Now, besides the fact that the confusion and chaos is prepping the world for this plan that's going to be presented by the Antichrist, there's also a moral decline that is happening, and I think, again, going to reach its ultimate fulfillment during the tribulation, where people have become so bizarrely delusional that they will throw their hat in, so to speak, or be complicit in the death of anyone who doesn't take the mark of the beast and support the Antichrist killing them because they're against the greater good as they see the greater good. Now, the Gateway Pundit says Elizabeth Warren says Kamala Harris' biggest accomplishment as VP was visiting an abortion clinic. Democrat Senator and fake Indian Elizabeth Warren went on CNN to promote Kamala Harris after she stole all of Joe Biden's delegates. And obviously, the Gateway pundit is the one who is voicing this. And Harris is now at the top of the Democratic ticket after Obama and Pelosi forced Joe Biden out of the 2024 race. And CNN's Caitlin Collins asked Warren what Harris' biggest accomplishment was as vice president. And the fake Indian said Harris' biggest accomplishment was visiting an abortion clinic. She was the first vice president in history to visit an abortion clinic, Elizabeth Warren said. And Kamala Harris has done nothing of note in the past 3 years as vice president. And since Joe Biden dropped out of the race via an announcement on X, the Democrat media complex has thrown their support behind Kamala, even though she is highly unpopular. And Biden appointed Harris as the nation's border czar, and she made only one trip to the border. More than 15 million illegal aliens, mainly military-aged men, crossed over the border on Biden-Harris open borders invitation. Kamala Harris spent more time dancing at backyard barbecues and rappers like the good old days than visiting the border. Her greatest accomplishment in these years, these tumultuous years, during the presidency of Joe Biden, was visiting an abortion clinic. Again, according to Elizabeth Warren, just the value system is so tainted. And, I think this is one thing we need to keep in mind. This is what this is all about. This is why the hatred and why, that Donald Trump is viewed as a threat to our democracy, because the threat is to abortion. And they blame the Roe v. Wade reversal, or just basically sending the decision back to the individual states, which is constitutionally proper, is blamed on Donald Trump because of the Supreme Court nominees, or the Supreme Court justices that he appointed. And people are saying there'll just be more of the same if we get Trump back in there. And again, just the thinking today is just beyond bizarre. And the Hill reports that Kamala Harris did say, we're not playing around on abortion rights. Vice President Harris on Tuesday rallied supporters at a gathering for a historically black sorority, drawing roars from the crowd when she pledged to codify abortion protections when I am president. Harris was in Indianapolis for a Zeta Pi Beta sorority, Grand Boule, a major gathering for the sorority, which is part of the Divine Nine historically black fraternities and sororities. And the vice president delivered remarks that closely resembled the speech which she has given since she likely became the Democratic nominee in place of President Biden, putting a particular emphasis on promoting freedoms like the right to vote and reproductive rights. Across our nation, we are witnessing a full-on assault on hard-fought, hard-won freedoms and rights, she said. The freedom to vote, the freedom to be safe from gun violence, the freedom of a woman to make decisions about her own body and not have the government telling her what to do. Well, if you extend that out, and basically that a woman has the right to end the life of someone with their own DNA, contributed by the two parents of this particular child, then who's to say that you don't have that same right outside the womb? Now, for those who would say, well, that's kind of extreme. No, that's exactly where this is going. When you normalize killing the most innocent among us, it's just a hop, skip, and a jump to saying, yeah, kill everybody who won't take the mark. And we need to keep our focus on exactly how massive this spiritual battle is and who's behind it. It's all moving toward the worship of the first beast during the tribulation period. And Harris argued people do not have to abandon their faith to agree that women should not be told what to do with their bodies by the government. Well, yeah, they do. You absolutely do. The Bible says not to murder. That's what the Ten Commandments state very clearly. And by the way, the Hebrew word there in the fourth commandment doesn't say, or I'm sorry, not the fourth commandment, but the Hebrew word does not say, thou shalt not kill. The Hebrew word says, thou shalt not murder. And murder and killing are two completely different things. And abortion is murder. There's no question about it. Now, she sought directly to connect former President Trump with the erosion of abortion rights across the country. When he was president, Donald Trump handpicked 3 members of the U.S. Supreme Court because he intended for them to overturn Roe v. Wade, she said. And as he intended, they did. Well, let me tell you something. When I am president of the United States and when Congress passes a law to restore those freedoms, I will sign it into law. Harris said to the applause, "We're not playing around." And she's been the face of the White House messaging on protecting abortion access following the overturn of Roe v. Wade, and is likely to make that central to her campaign for the presidency in the hope of driving turnout among Democrats. I'm going to make sure we can kill as many babies as possible or as wanted. And that's her central campaign point. Has the world gone mad? Absolutely, no question. Now, again, for any who might be thinking, well, you're taking things a little far. Well, to that I would say, not so. LifeSite News says a pro-lifer was just sentenced to 41 months in jail on FACE Act charges by the Biden DOJ. A pro-life advocate was sentenced to 41 months in jail, that's 3.4 years, on Wednesday after trying to save the lives of unborn babies by blocking the entrance to a Planned Parenthood abortion center in Manhattan. The sentencing is punishment for charges brought against Bevelyn Beatty Williams in December 2022 in a conspiracy to violate the freedom of access to clinic entrances. That's the FACE Act, Freedom of Access to Clinics Entrances, as well as violating the FACE Act through force, threats of force, and physical obstruction resulting in bodily harm. There was none of those things other than the blocking of the door. The federal charges stem from the fact that Williams, along with her friend and fellow pro-life activist Edme Chavanis, sought to stop women from aborting their babies in multiple states, including Florida, Tennessee, Georgia, and Brooklyn, New York. The charges alleging bodily harm by Williams pertain to an incident at Planned Parenthood Manhattan's Health Center, a euphemistic name that obscures the fact that innocent unborn babies are killed through abortion there. And video footage shared with LifeSite News shows that at the time, Williams placed herself in front of the entrance to the abortion mill, and eventually a Planned Parenthood staff member yanked the door open from the outside beside Williams to let a woman through. Williams refused to move, letting her body weight press against the door as the staff member tried to keep it open to let the woman through. The staff member says that Williams was crushing her hand, but Williams stresses that this was accidental injury, which she said is not included in FACE. Again, she was convicted on February 22nd, 2024, of one count of violating the FACE Act after a 9-day trial before U.S. District Court Judge Jennifer L. Rochon, a Biden appointee, who imposed the sentence now just Wednesday. And her jail sentence of 3.4 years will be followed by 2 years of supervised release following her time served. Speaking to LifeSite News on Tuesday, Williams said that she and other Christian pro-lifers are being targeted for prosecution as revenge for the Dobbs versus Jackson decision that overturned Roe v. Wade. Now, we know obviously that in the last days, perilous times will come. They have come indeed. And we do know that, as Jesus said, we're going to be hated by all for his name's sake. We also know that good and evil are going to and have exchanged definitions, and to do something to save a child's life is now viewed as a crime and has been for some time. But again, Christians, we need to stand up. We need to stand for the unborn. We are the world's only salt and light. We're the only preserving and purifying influence that the world has. And when we're gone, that influence is going to go with us, and the world is going to do as it pleases, including the wholesale slaughter of living human beings. Why? Because they won't take a mark on their right hand or forehead, a mark which clearly indicates your allegiance to the beast and the devil, obviously. Now, the Rare Foundation is reporting, here's our last story, that Islam is threatening the Olympics as jihadists target Paris 2024 Games and infiltrate security. As France braces for the Paris 2024 Olympics, the infiltration of security by Qatari forces amplifies the imminent threat of jihadist attacks. And a troubling video circulating on social media has raised further alarms and fear for the upcoming Paris 2024 Olympics. A video released by a mass jihadi threatening significant violence and retaliation for Western support of Israel. The latest jihad threat highlights the broader theme. Islamic terrorists are targeting the Olympics and have managed to infiltrate security apparatus. In the minute-long clip released on Tuesday, an Arabic-speaking man, his face covered by a keffiyeh, which is the Palestinian war scarf, addresses the people of France and French President Emmanuel Macron, warning them of dire consequences for their support of the Zionist regime in its criminal war against the people of Palestine. You provided the Zionists with weapons. You helped murder our brothers and sisters, our children, the jihadi states. You invited the Zionists to the Olympic Games. You will pay for what you've done. And wearing dark attire and a Palestinian flag draped over his chest, the man ominously declares rivers of blood will flow through the streets of Paris. This day is approaching, God willing. Allah is the greatest. Now, obviously, I had one more story. I don't want to miss this one either. But obviously, we need to understand that this domination, this Sharia law being forced, and the whole world submitting, which is what actually the word Islam means. It means submission, is the primary goal. And, there are, as they call them, moderate Muslims, and sadly, they're much like moderate Christians. They don't know what their own book says. And I saw something very troubling the other day, and I just want to point it out. And, there's a TV host, and I'm not sure what all shows he does. I know there's a game show that he hosts, but a guy named Steve Harvey was saying, the Quran doesn't teach violence. It's a wonderful, peaceful religion. And this is just absolute ignorance. The Quran tells them, when you find them hiding behind a rock or a bush, to kill them. The Quran says, take not for your friends, Jews or Christians, for those who befriend them or like them. And Allah does not guide an unjust people. They are told that if they don't fight in the day of distinction, that they will go to hell. And, this is what ISIS is all about. If you want to throw a label at ISIS and groups like it, these are Orthodox Muslims. They are following a literal interpretation of the not just the Quran, but the Hadith and the Sunnah. And, again, there's language that, you could read with, like you could any verse in the Bible, isolated from the context and come away with the wrong conclusion. But, this is submission. That is their ultimate goal, is submission, that the world submit to Islam and Sharia law. And, statements like that, it just, it's so aggravating to see people who have a platform, who for whatever reason just communicate things that simply aren't true. And so that's why, again, we need to be careful about who and what we listen to. And this last story comes from the Christian Headlines, and I don't know how many of you have heard, but I'm sure most of you are familiar with a pastor named Robert Jeffress, a man he's frequent, or he is, I should say, on Jan Markell's program, Understanding the Times, and he's very well known and often finds his way onto news programs and things of that nature. Well, the First Baptist Church sanctuary, the old sanctuary, caught on fire. And this story reports that there was a stunning miracle that took place. And over the weekend, a 4-alarm fire that ravaged much of the First Baptist Church Dallas Historic Sanctuary spared a cherished 130-year-old pulpit, which had been a cornerstone for some of the congregation's most beloved pastors. The sanctuary, built in 1890 in downtown Dallas, stood adjacent to the church's current sanctuary, and it was actively used until the church's renovation in 2013, during which it was preserved as a secondary worship center and a cherished historic landmark. Members and staff of the church say the pulpit's preservation is a testimony of God's blessing. And the pulpit was used by such pastors as George Truett from 1867 to 1944 and W.A. Criswell from 1909 to 2002. A true miracle, Robert Jeffers said, especially if you saw the flames engulfing the place this pulpit was displayed, Jeffers said as he wrote on X, or formerly Twitter. So indescribably grateful for this miracle, former pastor O.S. Hawkins wrote on X, in the midst of the total destruction of the church in the fire, this 130-year-old pulpit of Truett and Criswell and the others somehow miraculously survived. Thank you, Lord. So indescribably grateful for this miracle in the midst of the total destruction of the church of this, I'm sorry, that's a repeated paragraph, pardon me. And the congregation worshiped in the city's Kay Bailey Hutchison Convention Center over the weekend, and plans for this Sunday are not definite, although it's possible the church could be back in its own newer sanctuary. Now, this is interesting, and, it's pretty awesome to see something like that happen. We've seen other fires. Remember the cross at Ground Zero, where the two pieces of steel or iron formed a cross at Ground Zero in the aftermath of that act of terror, and other things like that. Bibles that protected a soldier. That the bullet hit the Bible and protected their heart, or whatever it was. We do see these kind of things going on. But I think if we're going to take anything away from this, let me remind you all, there's something much more important than a pulpit that has been saved by the fires of hell. And that's you and me, by the blood of Jesus. And, as I say, with things wrapping up and time becoming so short, I think we just need to focus on what it is we've been called to do like never before. And two, it's interesting. I mentioned a few weeks ago in one of the messages, that there's just, titles are so important to messages, because if there's anything that, people don't like or whatever, they won't listen to it. And I just did a message last Sunday called Keep Up the Good Work. And, we're studying the book of Nehemiah, and Nehemiah was under heavy enemy fire, and the enemy sought to do him harm. And what did he do? He kept up the good work. This is not a message on works. And I highly encourage you to go to YouTube and listen to that message, because it's about the time we are living in. Nehemiah said they kept inviting him to go down to the villages in the plain of Ono. But he told him, I cannot come down. I'm doing a great work. And the devil keeps trying to get us to stoop down to his level. And we cannot come down from the good work of sharing the gospel, because people don't like it today, or it's culturally out of step, or it's unpopular, whatever it is. That's the good work the message talks about, the good work of sharing the gospel, not earning salvation through good works. And again, I think it's kind of a sad commentary that, that's messages about works or this or that. But I really want to encourage you, go give it a listen. And I heard so much as I greet people at the door each week, I heard over and over and over, man, I needed to hear that. It just keeps things in perspective. We are here for a reason and a season, and I believe that season is wrapping up. Soon we're going to be going home. Well, that's it for this week. And again, thank you so much for joining us. I so appreciate those who log on and watch, and thanks to all who commented last week, and the prayers for Amir and all the other comments and encouragements on both the Q&A and the lineup. But thank you. And it's greatly appreciated that you take the time to sit down and hear what's going on in the world. Well, that's it for this week. And Lord willing, we'll see you next week. But one thing I know for sure, we'll see you here, there, or in the air. God bless.